Welcome to the Veterinary Blueprint Podcast, brought to you by Butler Vet Insurance, hosted by Bill Butler. The Veterinary Blueprint Podcast is for veterinarians and practice managers who are looking to learn about working on their practice instead of in their practice. Each episode, we will bring you successful, proven blueprints from others both inside and outside the veterinary industry. Welcome to today's episode.
Welcome to another exciting episode of the Veterinary Blueprints Podcast, where animal health meets entrepreneurship and business ideas. I am your host, Bill Butler, and today we have a very special guest joining us, Ryan Whitley, Vice President of Business Development at RWE Design Build. Ryan's going to bring over 14 years of experience in animal health industry with a deep understanding of how to improve the point of care experience for both patients and caregivers. At RWE Design Build, he's been instrumental in creating innovative solutions for veterinary practices, ensuring they have the best facilities to deliver exceptional care. In today's episode, we'll dive into Ryan's journey from his extensive tenure at Midmark to his current role at RWE Design Build. We'll explore the unique challenges and opportunities in designing and building state-of-the-art veterinary facilities and how these innovations are shaping the future of animal healthcare. So stay tuned as we uncover Ryan's insights on merging business acumen with passion for animal health and how practice design can drive progress in the veterinary field. This is an episode you don't want to miss. So welcome, Ryan.
Thank you, sir. That was an inspirational introduction, and I hope I can live up to it.
Well, we'll find out.
That's right.
So welcome, Ryan. You and I met at VMX this year down in Orlando, correct? Kind of the last day, last hour kind of thing during VMX, right?
That's correct.
So first, why don't you tell us a little bit about, who Ryan is, how you're involved in animal health, and what you're currently doing at RWE Design Build?
Sure. Started out 15 years ago or so, was lucky enough to get introduced to some folks at Midmark, who at that time were not a huge name in animal health, huge on the human medical side, developing on the human dental side. Probably like one of the luckiest things that ever happened to me. They're an amazing company, great partner for anybody in the industry. They're a very unique company from a manufacturing perspective, just because of the breadth of products that they make. But I grew up with them, so always wanted to be a part of the animal health community. Grew up as one of those kids who brought everything home with them, wanted every dog they saw. Thought I was going to be a veterinarian, figured out pretty quickly that I was bad at chemistry and science and just paying attention in general for some things. So figured I would try a different path and, did the only thing I kind of knew growing up in a clinic. I worked at a vet clinic for 5 years, doing all the things that, young kids do when they grow up, trying to be a technician, cleaning kennels, all that good stuff. So got some real good real life experience doing that. And then just kind of parlayed that over to trying to get into jobs with Marielle, Frontline, like anything that I saw come in the door, that looks great. You're walking into clinics all the time. And that path never really materialized for me, but I did run into Midmark, who was gracious enough to give me a chance, and started a career with them up in Chicago, being their animal health rep, and just loved it. Just loved the industry, the people that you get to work with, whether it's distribution, financial partners, real estate partners, but more importantly, just veterinarians and their staff. I think the thing I love most about this industry, once you get into it, you find that people don't leave. They may change companies, but they don't leave. It's just that it's a big, small community, and you kind of take care of each other, and you're focused on your industry and the health of the industry. And I don't know anybody that really gets into animal health with the first thought of I'm going to make some money. It's always, everybody has the same kind of initial, goal, which is, love of animals, wanting to better the industry. So, that's always kind of what's kept my interest in wanting to be a part of it.
So how did you transition from Midmark to RWE Design Build, and what did that look like for you in saying, okay, I've got my feet underneath me in the industry with Midmark and the opportunity at RWE, and now that you're there?
Working in Chicago for Midmark, that's where RWE's, that's where our home base is, right? So that's where it all started 25 years ago. The guy named Bob the Builder, who hooked up with some local Chicago veterinarians and just tried to figure out how do we make better clinics, right? Both medicine-wise and more profitable. And that just grew into, this awesome situation where not only was Bob working with these local vets, but all of a sudden word spread and RWE just became the name for building veterinary clinics in Chicago. So obviously, working for a company that builds equipment for veterinary clinics, it just made sense for me to partner with these guys. Years over years, a guy named Jason Sanderson, who is the son-in-law of Bob, who started the company, eventually took over and bought the company. And him and I just had a really great relationship. And if you ever meet Jason, you'll understand very quickly why he's successful. Like, he's a straightforward guy. He's usually the smartest guy in the room. And he just knows what it takes to build efficiently and build well. But he also cares, right? Like, I was with Midmark for 15 years. I've already said like how great they are, right? Like, so it took a lot for me to leave Midmark. And I wouldn't have done it for a lot of situations. And I did it for them because I believe in what RWE has already done, how they do business, and, our ability to help the industry.
So, it's interesting that you mentioned that, because, for me in the insurance world, it's a little similar, right? Like, I didn't know that I specifically said I want to be a veterinarian, but just like in 6th grade, I wrote a paper about veterinarians and why the vet industry is important to society. And like the end of the paper, it's actually on the shelf behind me for those of you tuning in on a clip. I basically said, like, without veterinarians, people would get rabies and die, and all the cows would die, and like we wouldn't have any food to eat. Like, that's basically the summation of my 6th grade paper that I got an A in. But I think the common thread that you really touched on, Ryan, is like veterinarians and the people who work in the vet industry overall are just really good people. I've had the opportunity to dabble in other industries or work with other industries as an insurance professional, and I can't say the same that I really enjoy spending time with my clients and the other people. Like, you go to VMX or you go to Western Vet or you go to the local stuff, and just overall, they're like really good people in the industry. Veterinarians care, the different vendors care, everyone just kind of generally cares because it's easy to care, because like, who doesn't love dogs and cats? And you get the companion side, but the mixed and large animal side, and so it's just easy to care, right?
100%. Right. I think it's been proven over and over again, just things that I said before in regards to, people don't leave our industry, and there's a reason, right? It's nothing against everybody else. I mean, like I say in business, right? Not everybody's a great fit for everybody. That doesn't mean you're not good at your job. It doesn't mean your industry is not great. Yep. It's just, certain people, I think, interact well with others better. And that's a piece of the puzzle. And there's just good people in animal health.
Yeah. It's like, I'm a huge hockey fan. It's like the NHL player of the business world. Like, NHL players are down to earth. They drive pickup trucks. They might make a ton of money, but like, you just never know that. They don't have a lot of the majority of them just don't have that kind of flash. And I think that's true in the animal health world, where they're, the business owners, the practice owners and the associates are just, they're down to earth. So we met the last day of VMX down in Orlando. I'm cruising the floor in the expo hall, and I stopped by your booth. Actually, I was just walking by your booth, and it said number 1. I forget exactly what it says. Number 1 design build for veterinarians. I walked by, and I actually came back. I kind of did that, screeching halt, walk back, and I said, "Why are you guys number 1?" And you had a very good answer for me, and I'm interested to share that with our listeners today. What that is. Why does RWE think they're number 1?
I mean, to paint that picture, right, it was kind of like that cartoon stop, right? Like, you walked by and then like you processed the information and then you scooted back and was like, wait a minute, what makes you number 1, right?
Yeah, there's like 7 other design build dudes here.
Yeah, what makes you number 1? And I said, prove me not, right? Like, what makes me not number 1? Prove me wrong, right? So yeah, it's funny, right?
It was just funny how we met. It was the interaction, especially at the last day of the thing, because you've been there talking to a lot of people. So I've done that too. You get a little punchy, so it was a fun interaction.
Yeah, all in good fun, right? And there's some underground humor as to like, you can make statistics say anything, right? What this, what that, like, what I was referring to is this, right? But yeah, we don't have to get too much into it. We got a new booth. That phrase wasn't on the new booth. Not because of our interaction, but yeah, I mean, ultimately, yeah, it's just a funny way. It's a good story of how we met. And I still believe we're number one. Just because we didn't put it on there, I still firmly believe in the fact.
So my booth, I've got a pop-up banner that says, "We wrote the book on veterinary insurance."
Mm-hmm.
And then like a veterinarian walks by and I'm like, "Well, here, you want a copy of my book?" And like, "Oh, you really did actually write the book on veterinary insurance." Like, yeah, you got to have fun with everything. So, well, let me ask a question a different way then, Ryan. What sets RWE apart and why, that number one thing, but just generally overall, you've been doing this, as you mentioned, RWE specifically has been doing this for 25 years. So a lot of experience in this space. So, there's a lot of architect design build firms out there. I mean, name a company, there's some big players in the market, but then, there's architects, there's local builders, there's, what does RWE bring to the table? And why don't you talk about some of that process of designing and building a veterinary practice?
Yeah, I'm happy to talk about our process and probably just process in general, right? And what I would focus on more than like what separates RWE, and us specifically in the world or in the industry is more about like people who like us, who are focused, whether that is an architectural design firm, whether that is other like design build firms, or even just maybe a builder who doesn't have a design piece, right? Like I would tell you the biggest thing is that experience matters. In anything, right? And that's a very relatable statement. I feel like no matter what you do in life, right? If you go to somebody or you're trying something for the first time, right? It's not that you can't do it. It's that you can do it probably if you have enough time and the ability to make mistakes and learn and all that other stuff, right? But if you had one shot to do something, would you want somebody in that part of their growth process, or would you want somebody doing it that's been doing it for 10 years, right? And can do it very easily. You gain the advantage of that person already failing, right? And succeeding.
A number of times.
Yeah, a number of times, right? Nobody's perfect. Everybody grows. Everybody learns, right? So, there's just a big advantage into working with somebody who has experience and focus under their belt because, like I said, you gain the advantage of all of their past failures and experiences, right? You get to ask those questions, or they get to tell you about the things that maybe you didn't even think of. So all of that comes with it, right? So, there's process involved in that. And anybody can build something, right? Just like any architect can draw drawings, right? But, when the experience comes in, it lends to certain advantages, experience levels, choices, things that you probably don't learn to appreciate until after the fact.
Well, it's like, I got the opportunity, upcoming episode I recorded at a veterinary practice down in Murfreesboro, Tennessee, and they had built a beautiful new practice. Well, they have eight of their exam rooms. You can actually do the exam outside, and they've got a little corral in the exterior. You walk through, there's a gate. You can sit on a park bench outside. There's a doorway to each individual exam room, and the tech can come in. They do all the work in the room. So if they do a blood draw, they do the blood draw in the room. So you get to see what that technician's actually doing. A lot of glass, a lot of light. You can actually, the operating room has a window in it because it actually, the origin of the practice was a converted house. So the first iteration of that exam room was actually in the dining room with a bay window. And so one of the veterinarians said, if you don't have an outside window in the new surgery, I'm not going to come work for you at the new practice. So it's like, there's so much glass and so much light, but like, until you think about those design features, when you're going to build it, you don't have that experience. And they put a lot of thought into what they were going to do. And I'm sure, I'm actually having a space built out for me because we're moving offices, and I obsessed about, well, how about this wall and where's this wall go? Because like, you're making, I'm just leasing an office space for 7 years, but if you're going to build your own building, that is a very long-term commitment to make sure that you have something in place. So when you're laying out and designing a practice, what are some of the big things that veterinarians just don't think about or aren't in their process that maybe they're coming to the table and they just don't have a thought on that they should have when they come to the table to work with a architect or builder?
Yeah, again, I hate to keep beating the same drum, but again, the whole experience matters thing comes into play, right? And Because I think if you don't work with somebody who's been through the process before, it's very easy to fall into the like, hey, what do you want? Right. And then just start creating what that person or that client wants, which I'm not saying that's wrong. Yeah, obviously it's their baby, right? You want to create, it's their dream, right? You want to be a part of that, help them bring that out. But I think it's also our responsibility to throw out their options, things that we've seen, right? Things to think about. So that's definitely part of the process, is working through kind of like, hey, like, what do you do now? What do you like doing, right? What do you focus on, right? And start to like, make sure that we're building the design around how they practice, right? You talked about a veterinarian who does everything inside of a clinic or inside of an exam room, right? Which is part of that process, right? If they're doing a lot of stuff in the exam room, well, okay, but now we have to design the exam rooms around that process, right? To make it efficient and how that flows to the rest of the clinic. Versus there's other people who will practice and say, hey, the exam room is just in the consultation area. I don't need barely anything in there, right? That's a place for the client to have some privacy, have a conversation, and then we head back to, the treatment area, the procedure areas of the clinic, and we do things back there. So that's a different design, right? Different clinicians will focus on different parts of veterinary medicine, general practice, specialties, but even within general practices, you've got things that people like to focus on, right? Who's in there? Surgeons, right? Do we need a single surgery suite? Do we need multiple surgery suites? Do we need a larger surgery suite that allows for 2 surgery tables? Are we focused on dentistry? Which, if you're not focused on dentistry, I would definitely do that. It's a huge part of revenue, or it's a huge ROI producer in veterinary medicine, right? So we recommend, if applicable in your space, to get a separate dental suite, right? And if you're not going to have 2 tables right off the bat, if you can, plan for a second table, because it should be a booming part of your practice if you're going to allocate resources towards learning that or developing it. If not, also, let's move on. Next steps, right? So we don't have to go through every scenario, but that's a big part of it.
Yeah. It's funny that you mentioned dental because, I've had a number of veterinarians that I work with who've said, oh, yeah, I'm going to start doing dental, or we're expanding our dental practice. As you mentioned, it is a big revenue driver. And so, there's a lot of opportunities to do that. And if you're not planning for that on the front end, let's say, your practice was built 25 years ago. You're a veterinarian who may have bought your practice, and now you think, okay, well, now I want to add dental, but we don't have room to do it. You're converting an exam room, or maybe you had, the one vet that I'm thinking about, they used to do kenneling and boarding for, the pound, or the animal control would bring dogs in, and they stopped doing that. So they just had all this room with all these extra kennels. Like, well, we're going to convert that to dental. And so if you have space in the practice to maybe reallocate down the road, but you're designing that in now with potential future, maybe it's not in the cards to say, well, we're not going to do it now, but how do we maybe convert an exam room? Let's make one exam room a little bigger so we can convert it down the road. And working with a builder who kind of has some of that in mind to say, okay, well, let's not have that as far away from the oxygen as we possibly can. We're going to put that one close so we can do anesthetics,
100%, right? Like whether you're trying to renovate an existing building, right, which can somewhat limit, your footprint and how you redesign, outside of maybe being able to do an addition, or if you're doing a ground up facility where, you can figure it out. Right? You can
clean
create.
Slate,
100%, right? And whether it's focusing on adding more exam rooms, right? Talking about ROI producers, right? Focus on adding more exam rooms, more treatment space, more special procedure space like dentistry. Like, it's got to be a consideration, right? And even if it's not on the immediate roadmap or plan, like you mentioned, having a plan to make it efficient and easy to add at a later date is a big part of the design for sure.
So working with a design build firm, I mean, for the lay veterinarian out there, let's say you're just an associate working at a practice, but you someday want to do that. What does it, you can work with an architect, and you can work with a builder, and you can work with, Midmark to outfit everything. What does a design, you talked about experience. What does a design build firm do technically?
Yeah. So I would tell you, like, it's a one-stop shop, right? So, there's that point. There's some continuity in the process, right? So if you have architects and designers internally that work at the same company as, the build side of it, right? There's probably some efficiencies and some synergies there as far as like knowing each other, right? So maybe you don't have as much back and forth.
Yep.
Well, that's their fault. That's this. Like, not that no one to put a negative light on it, but just like, there's just a one-stop shop, right? And then there's an efficiency with them already being very familiar. You can find the same efficiency if you had an architect and a builder that always work together, right? Even though they're separate entities. But I'm just saying, that these two parties know each other and they're used to working with each other. This builder knows how to read this architect's plans, and you're going to have a nice, successful build because you have that history, that continuity around it. I would say the other one would be like designing with a budget in mind, or from a builder's perspective, right? Because a builder will look at plans much differently than an architect will. And I'm not saying one is right or one is wrong, but, somebody who's purely focused on design, could pick really good things for every single aspect of it. But those really good things may not necessarily align with that person's budget. So somebody who's on both sides can probably give a really good snapshot or picture of like going through the design process, maybe directing them or presenting some scenarios where like, if you do that, then this, right? Like here's an alternative I might suggest that we have found over the last 25 years has given you a similar result or look, but also provides great durability and is going to last you a long time, right? So again, drawing back from that experience piece is just like going through that and knowing kind of what things cost, what has lasted in veterinary clinics, because that's the other stuff. Like people who work in healthcare, right? Whether they build medical facilities, dental facilities, or animal care facilities, right? Like I feel like we're the most unique, right? Like generally speaking, and I used to say this all the time, selling, Midmark cabinets, and I truly believe they're the best option. Midmark casework, Synthesis, shameless plug for those guys.
I'm sure they appreciate it.
Our patients walk in and potentially are going to pee on the cabinets, right? You don't really have that as much in a lot of other healthcare situations.
Or the lobby. I mean, I can't tell you the number of practices that I go into and I'm like, why do you have 7 candles burning and it still smells like pee in here? Oh, you have LPV flooring with seams. And no matter if you it's not a solid surface, it gets into the flooring no matter what you do, because it's nothing against any of the practices that I work with currently that have LPV flooring where there's seams in there. But you just think, if that was ceramic tile, you may not have the same issue in the lobby where you have all this happening. And man, my parents had a black lab. No matter how far my parents walked him before the vet, he took huge number 2 right in the lobby every time, no matter what they did. And so I'm sure, that experience that you have to say, might not want to go with this flooring option in the lobby just based on what you want to do, right?
Yeah, and it's about like, giving them choices that it doesn't have to be more expensive necessarily, right? It might just be a different choice that they don't know. Where if somebody hasn't had experience with that, they're like, oh, laminate's laminate, right? Laminate is waterproof. But like you mentioned, right? Some is seamless, some are not, right? And in our instance, that matters, right? It's not just an aesthetic thing. We want to blend both durability, and aesthetics. And, that goes back to another kind of thing that we're talking about, right? Like when looking at GCs and experience levels, right? Like it's, I think sometimes people look at our website, which we're very proud of, brand new, also shameless plug. It goes over some project and some really great stuff that we put together. It also wouldn't be on the website. But I think some people can look at that and immediately think like, oh, these guys must be really expensive. But it's not that we're more expensive, right? It's that, again, we've been doing this for a long time. We know what works. And we design to a certain spec, right? It doesn't mean that we are charging more for our services. It means that the materials that we use as kind of our base process are ones that we know are proven, right? That are going to give you the best product when it's all said and done and you're going to be happy. Now, can we design down from that if needed be? Of course we can. Can you design up from that? Obviously we can do that too if you've got the money to do it. But
how much does the bank lend you? Where do you want do you want the money to go? Do you want it to go into finishes or functionality? I think there's probably two different components to any sort of, build out, whether it's a ground up or renovation. Where do you want the money to go? And doesn't mean that you can't upgrade down the road, right?
And what you might do in different, what we call front of the house or back of the house, right? Like front of the house, client facing areas, right? you might make different choices there than what you make in the back, right? As far as like your aesthetic choices. And again, it's all about just kind of knowing what works, what doesn't work, that person's style, and giving them the best. But, it's, when you're talking about like general questions that you get right away, how much does it cost per square foot? How much does this project cost? And it's a trick question, right? Because
I get the same trick question, Ryan, on insurance. Like, well, how much is the insurance going to cost? I'm like, well, I don't know. I have no idea. What do you want to do? How much insurance do you want to buy? It can be as little insurance and just what the bank requires, and you run around with hardly any coverage, or do you want to build the Taj Mahal and have, marble in the employee bathroom? I mean, you can do A to B, A to Z.
100%, right? And that's just like, again, one of those early questions, like it comes out a lot, like how much does it cost, right? And you try to give general numbers, but you have to be careful when asking somebody that, because everybody has a different style of how they deliver those numbers, right? I always compare it to a residential setting. In my own experience, I've obviously just moved into a house here. I've got stuff everywhere. Like you go past a sign that says houses from the 600s or 400s, whatever it is, right? So you're thinking, oh, $400,000 house, that sounds reasonable, whatever it is, right? And then you get in the door and it's like, well, you got to buy the lot and you got to buy your doors and you got to go to the design studio. And all of a sudden 400 is 800 real quick, right? And again, everybody has their own.
Oh, you wanted a finished basement with your house.
So everybody's got their own process. When we give out those numbers initially, what we try to do is we try to give them the numbers where we end up, right? Like generally speaking, and you can design up and down, but here are some numbers that we give out, meaning that like, if everything goes per average, that this is generally where you'll end up on a cost per square footage if you do it to the spec that we recommend. And again, we can play up and down from that, but there's like in any business, right? Like if you're trying to get somebody in the door, there's also a different theory, right? Where you give them a much lower and they say, oh, why are you $100 more per square foot? It's like, we're not more expensive. We're talking about two different things, right? We're talking about different materials. Something's different because we're not just $100 more per square foot.
Stay with us. We'll be right back.
This episode of the Veterinary Blueprint Podcast is sponsored by Butler Vet Insurance. Being an insurance agent at Butler Vet Insurance, I've seen firsthand the difficulties veterinarians face insuring their practices. But do you know that we wrote the book on veterinary insurance? It's called Protecting Your Veterinary Practice, Insider Insurance Secrets Every Veterinarian Must Know. It's not just a book, it's a comprehensive guide that speaks to the unique challenges and insurance solutions for the veterinary community. With over 20 years experience from cyber liability to business auto and workers' compensation, our aim at Butler Vet Insurance is to reduce the stress of insurance for those dedicated to animal care. If you're a veterinary practice owner or manager and looking for some guidance on your insurance, follow our insurance blueprint. Discover the Butler Vet Insurance difference. And together, let's put the pieces of the puzzle together. Butler Vet Insurance, reducing the stress of insurance. And so, when you engage a veterinarian who's interested in doing a project, where does that generally lie? Have they met with a bank? Have they talked to a lender? Have they found a lot or a location that they want 3,000 square feet in a strip mall that they want to redo? I mean, where do you generally get engaged in the process?
We love to get engaged as early as possible. Just because I feel like, again, drawing from that experience, we have people in-house that have been doing this for a long time. And I think, even without charging anything, we can be a good resource for folks in helping them look at a space, right? Look at a piece of land and give them a little due diligence up front as to things that may potentially impact their budget or their project. So the earlier we can be involved, the better. But no matter when we get involved, we like to do as much, right? Like if things are already in place, we're not necessarily going to try to change that, but try to add something to wherever we get in so that, again, we're trying to help, get this towards a more positive result. But the short answer to your question is as early as possible. But the journey could start anywhere, right? It all depends on your resources, right? And generally speaking, distribution's obviously, a great resource for clinics because they're in there all the time. They're kind of their eyes and ears as to what's going on in the industry. So generally speaking, I feel like sometimes those guys get their ear pulled first in regards to thought of a new practice and hey, do you know anybody? And, that could be commercial real estate people. That could be banks that are, focused on veterinary medicine or the animal health community specifically, which again, shameless plug, Bank of America, Live Oak, Provide, to name a few. Like, these are folks that have specific animal health divisions to their company, right, who have products specifically designed for them. So any one of these people that I think are focused and have experience in the industry can be a good starting point.
Yeah.
And then also recommend other people that obviously they feel comfortable and confident in to recommend to be a part of that process. I feel like the more folks that you can get around you that have experience in it, the better, and I'm not saying that's just me, right? I encourage people. We were just at a convention last week for Animal Care Shelter Humane Societies, which was an amazing show, Animal Care Expo that happened down in San Antonio. In dealing with those folks, they were like, hey, that question comes up, like, where would you start? Who should we talk to? I was like, talk to a bunch of people. Like, I would never stop you, like, say, like, and try to guard you from talking to other architects, design build firms.
Yeah.
Like, these are our peers. They're not our enemies, right? These are folks that I think you should talk to. We can't build every clinic. We can't design every clinic. So
yeah, I can't insure every vet practice. And so, like you said, it's funny because the theme that keeps coming up in the podcast, just generally overall, whether it's an attorney, a CPA, a banker, design build, is like, you just need a really good team around you as a business owner. So that way, because they know animal health. As a veterinarian, I can't do a TPLO surgery, just even if my cat Louie need to get castrated, I'm not doing it at home. I need an expert. And so having that expert who understands, even just from a device perspective, and that's the thing I think is unique about this industry is, I'm going to speak for myself personally. Like, if a veterinarian says, hey, Bill, here's my insurance policies, will you look at them? And do these look good? Like, I'm not going to say, well, I'm $300 an hour to look at your insurance policy. Like, it's going to take me, because of my experience, 10 minutes to look at them and go, hey, you're missing this, this, and this. Just call your agent and say, hey, how much does this cost to add? And I'm sure, for you, it's a little bit of the same where, like you said, the first conversation's free. Like, hey, I'm looking to do this. What does that look like? Like, whether it's you or another design build firm, like, you're going to give that veterinarian 20 minutes, half hour on the phone to talk it through what they want.
Ultimately, whether we're a great fit for them or somebody else is, that's all good, right? My main point to them would just be to, like, again, focus on somebody that has experience is going to give them a better result. And ultimately, whether it's personality, process, whatever it is, if somebody's a better fit, a connection, that's all great. But like you said, in that first 20 minutes, 30 minutes, whatever it is, I feel like it's a responsible person is going to give them kind of like just some helpful tips and things to look at when talking to anybody so that, they can make the best choice for them.
With your time now with RWE, what are some of the biggest pitfalls or mistakes you've seen veterinarians make with their thought process that they get to the end of the project and you may have wanted to say, please don't do that, and they did, or they did and they said, I wish I hadn't done that.
I mean, maybe not as much new school, right? But I would just tell you, like, there are no standards in animal health building right now, right? There's AHA, there's Fear Free. Like, there's certain, associations that you can get accredited from and things like that. But like in the human medical community, right, you have to adhere to certain standards, right? And currently for us, that doesn't exist, right? And I feel like sometimes there's this methodology of like minimalism or cost effectiveness where, this is the way we've always done it, it's fine, right? Like, that doesn't mean, like, how we did things 30, 40 years ago, that your previous clinic was designed in, like, we wouldn't design it that way. Just because it's okay and it works doesn't mean it's best. And if you have the ability to do it better, like, why wouldn't you, right? So again, it goes back to surrounding yourself with people, a team that have experience that, can help guide you through that, and keeping an open mind, right? Like, understanding cost versus value and going through the process of really kind of opening the doors as to, what a modern day veterinary clinic can be, what makes it successful, and how does the way that I operate or want to operate, how can those things come together to give me the best possible? Because there's, if it was the one solution for all, it would be easy, but that's the hard part, right? Everybody does things a little bit differently. Everybody has different specialties, wants, focuses. So, it's, again, going back to the diversity, like, we've built everything from small startup practices to an 80,000 square foot ground up specialty clinic. And we've been lucky enough to get into other things, right? Shelter building, grooming facilities, right? So, all those things come together and give you, a great amount of experience to draw from to help everybody else in their own individual process. So,
good example is a local. Oh, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, just because I kind of got off your question there a little bit, but yeah, I mean, again, I think it all just goes back to just trusting experience and going through that process with an open mind, as to like the way that it was doesn't have to be the way that it is. And then to let, you mentioned it, right? Like smart people who run a business, they don't want to be the smartest person in the room. They want to work with other people that they feel like can be smarter than them, at least in one aspect of the business, so that they can make the whole group better, right? So that's why you should get yourself around people who have experience within this industry so that you can get, that process moving forward in the right direction.
It's interesting because one thought comes to mind. We just had one of our newest clients. They did a design build project here local to our area in Minnesota. In the initial part of the design process, they wanted to do grooming and boarding. And they thought, oh yeah, we'll do grooming and boarding. And when they looked at the cost and the footprint of the lot, it was a ground up build, new construction and a new business development here in Minnesota. And when they looked at the return on investment for adding grooming and boarding, like it was going to take them 10 years to make the money back on the extra square footage and design build and everything else to add that in. It's just like, well, we're veterinarians. We were going to hire out the grooming anyway. So it wasn't even going to be us. So this like additional service really wasn't going to add any actual value to us as veterinarians. It was just an additional, quote unquote service, because that's the way every veterinarian used to do it. Used to be able to get grooming and boarding, but now, all the doggy daycare and everything else has popped up and taken a lot of that out of the practice into its own thing where, I think you have a lot fewer veterinarians designing that in, but they looked at the cost and said, there's no way we can do this. So they actually cut almost 2,000 square feet off their practice because they just weren't going to do it.
It makes 100% sense, right? Like, again, like it's like facts versus perception, right? It can be different, right? Like, well, I think this person, produces this, right? Just because I talk to them more, right? When in fact, in reality, like the data may say something separately, right? Like, grooming makes money. And I'm not saying it doesn't, right? We're saying grooming makes money, handling makes money. Like, okay, but have you actually evaluated that, based on, so again, that's another piece of the puzzle. Like there's financial folks out there that can be really helpful in evaluating, especially if you already have a business and maybe you're moving to a larger facility, opening another facility, whatever it is, right? Like to really evaluate where your revenue is coming from so that you can use that information to help make design choices on your next facility, right? Like, oh my God, I didn't realize that dentistry is actually second on the list in what I'm making. I should definitely focus on that. Yeah. So again, not having to get into every single scenario, but it's a great point, right? To look at those things, because what has been or what your perception of things may not be reality.
Well, I also think it's demographics really of where you're building, right? Like this is a Twin Cities metro practice and there's doggy daycares and grooming everywhere. And that's where, again, working with smarter people in the room where you've got a banker who says, well, yeah, but there's no grooming within 20 miles of your practice because you're in rural Illinois. Let's say you're down in Centralia, Illinois, and there's no groomers down there. Well, yeah, maybe add grooming because you're the only groomer in town.
Exactly.
To coin a phrase. So, and then working with the design build team to say, hey, if we add grooming, what does that look like? And let's say grooming bombs, how do we convert that to another surgery or dental suite down the road? I could. Well, I mean, I do the insurance on them, so I see enough and tour enough of them that, you see what. And the only reason I say that is I tour a lot of practices that I work with that have dog food piled up where kennels used to be, and they used to do kenneling. And you're just paying for square footage that's not being used, and they want to do something with that space. I mean, I'm sure you've seen it over and over.
Kennels, cages, especially if they build like the 3 to 4 story stainless steel cage banks, like become storage real quick, yes. Right? On top of stuff, right? And sometimes we'll design to eliminate that opportunity, right? Just so things don't get cluttered. Because if there's a spot to lay something, technicians tend to do that, right? I'll stick this cat litter up here or whatever. And it just, goes where no one's going to reach it again. So yeah, it's a great point, and looking at that and again, designing, even if the things aren't necessarily clear, designing in a way that gives you some options going forward, is a great idea.
Yeah. So my new office space, I'm actually putting a podcast studio in, but the podcast studio is a normal office and it's an interior room with no exterior walls. But let's say I stop doing a podcast, that's another office. And so having the ability to convert the space and again, working with somebody who understands the industry overall. If there was, besides what you've already covered on as we start to wrap this up, Ryan, besides what you've covered on about starting early, working with a good team, and maybe, having some ideas about what you want the practice to be long-term and what your passions are, again, I think what is the one, if you had one piece of advice to the veterinarian that you want to leave them with, if they're walking away from your booth space, your brand new developed booth space that looks gorgeous as a design build firm, what would that be?
It's a good question. I feel like I've given you like that, you've taken away my best answers already, but
well, give me your worst answer. What's the worst answer?
Again, I think it's just to be an open mind, to be honest, right? Like just, be the person who wants to work with people. Like don't have your preset in there block you from other ideas, right? I think that's the worst thing that can happen for somebody is people come in with different ideas of what success looks like, what a clinic can be, how it operates. So again, I think it's just going back to getting into the right people and don't just meet with one person, right? Meet with multiple people, figure out, whether it's process, a personal connection, whatever it may be, right? Like understand what their history is, what their past is, what they're all about, and just put good people around you to help make a good decision, right? And then, if going to, what makes a veterinary clinic great these days, going back to that process of focusing on, again, your wants, your needs, talk with people with experience who can maximize, the success, right? Success looks different for different people, whether it's money, practicing best possible care. Those two things should marry each other, right? I learned that a long time ago. Again, Midmark, right? Better medicine, better care. If you're doing things the right way, success follows, right? Like if you're doing things medically and operating them properly and getting people around you to give you the right advice, you're going to be successful. So just take that in, use that to your advantage. Advice is free mostly.
Absolutely. I think, and so to add to what you just said, invest in going to a large national conference, VMX, Western Vet, because a lot of the major players are there, yourself and a lot of the other design build firms, architects, instead of, I'm the supporting member chair for the local MVMA, and we have these members locally. Nothing against the local ones, and go see what the national guys are doing, like you, and maybe you wind up going back to say, yeah, I want somebody who's actually in my local state association versus RWE, or name another one who's national. But again, go have those conversations, make an investment, and you go to the large national convention, and the big players are there. And then you can compare and contrast that to the local player who's, because I'm sure you see this, just about every state convention or state association has one architect, one or two design build people, a couple architects who are doing the stuff at a local market, Minnesota or Chicago. I'm sure RWE has some local competition in Chicago who aren't at the national shows. But if you're a veterinarian who's going to make a huge investment financially and personally, just emotionally in building a practice, going to talk to these people at a national level and a local level is probably a really good idea.
There's so many shows now, right? There's so many shows, whether it's specific to a certain side of the industry or just kind of a general, there's so many of them to be able to take advantage of. But I would agree, to get the best bang for your buck, it actually is these big national shows where that everybody's going to be there. And, playing off what you just said, in no way am I saying that the local person is going to be worse for you, right? I'm not saying that. There's been plenty of times where I've advised people to, to go that route, right? Or to look into that. What I'm saying is that if you're doing that route, I would still find somebody who has experience.
Absolutely. Yeah. Cause, probably one thing more than anything else is I'm learning the timing of a construction project is critical. And if you've got somebody who hasn't built a veterinary practice before, that timeline can probably balloon out of control because they just don't have as you've said multiple times, the experience to say the scheduling of what happens when and how it all works is super critical with when you think you're going to open
a good point,
practice.
Right? And probably the point I maybe should have made when you asked me the question about your parting advice, right? Is that, cost on an invoice or a proposal isn't necessarily cost, right? So somebody could give you a construction contract, right? Whether we already talked about more expensive versus using different materials, how that whole process works. But cost savings on a proposal doesn't necessarily mean cost savings on a project, right? Just because if somebody can get you in a facility faster, what is that worth it to you, right? They don't have to make certain mistakes or learn how to install this or learn how to do that, right? So even though that cost sheet is maybe a little bit less initially, if they take 2 or 3 extra months to do it, what does that cost you, right? Like, so there's different ways of allocating it, right? So again, it all goes back to just making sure you're talking to different people, understanding the entire scope, cost, time, product, what am I getting? All those things play into, the cost of an overall project versus just numbers on a page that you're saying, right?
It's interesting walking around the big shows in that all of you, I'm putting you in a category, design, build, architect, you all build beautiful veterinary practices. You don't put the ugly ones in your advertising. So I think, the takeaway for veterinarians is probably, as Ryan has alluded to, shop the market, talk to someone who can help you out, but really experience matters. And there's lots of experience in the industry. Ryan Whitley at RWE Design Build can offer you that experience along with a host of others. But Ryan, if a veterinarian was out there and wanted to engage with RWE, how would they find you, or how would they find RWE Design Build?
Yeah, RWEdesignbuild.com is a great place to start, right? Look at some pictures. You can see our process. You can see some headshots of the folks that work for us. So yeah, go there. That's a great place. You can connect with me there. You can find us on LinkedIn. We try to be as many shows as possible. But the website's a great place to start.
Perfect. And it's a brand new, beautiful website as well.
Thank you. Yeah, we like it.
So, well, thanks so much for joining us, Ryan. We really appreciated your time and insight today on the Veterinary Blueprints Podcast.
Thank you, sir. Great to be with you, Bill.
Awesome. As always, remember to like, share, and review the podcast. It helps us get the message out there and share it with your veterinary friends. Make sure to tune into the next episode of the Veterinary Blueprints Podcast, where we bring business ideas to animal health.